A warm welcome to everyone turning into a new episode of Beyond the Battlefield, a podcast about CIMIC and everything that is connected to it. Today we're talking about human security, a topic that is super important, especially nowadays. And for this, I have two special guests with me. One is my colleague Paul from the CCOE, and one is Esther from the External Action Service in Brussels. Before we start, I'd like to ask you to introduce yourselves, because who is more equipped to introduce yourself than yourself? For this, I want to start with you, Esther, because Paul, I know you already. But Esther, please.
Thank you. Thank you also for the invitation to share something about human security. I guess that you have invited me because of my work on human security, especially from the time that I've served in Iraq for the NATO mission in Iraq, where I was indeed the advisor on human security. But I've recently changed to the Office of the Special Representative for Human Rights in the European External Action Service, where I will be focusing on conflict and crisis situations where human rights matter, but especially also the international humanitarian law. And besides that, I also lecture in the Institute for International Humanitarian Law in San Remo. So that is probably how I can share a little bit about my expertise here.
Yeah, it's very impressive, all of your steps and what you did. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Paul, please.
Yeah, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Paul Bezem. I'm from the Royal Netherlands Air and Space Forces, actually, but currently I'm working here at the CCOE. So I'm working at the Concepts, Interoperability and Capability branch. And I'm here the SME, the subject matter expert on human security and the cross-cutting topics.
Well, I'm also looking forward to have your point on it, because you're probably more into the NATO perspective as well, especially because we're working here in the doctrines. But before we start more in the topic, I'd like to define human security a little bit, because I think everyone understands it also in different terms. When we look at the UN, the European Union, maybe also humanitarian actors and NATO. So, Paul, could you just give us a quick definition of human security from a NATO perspective?
Yeah, I think it's good to mention that there are two types of human security, actually, the United Nations one and the NATO's one. And there is a difference in both of them. And I think NATO's human security is people-centered, so people are important. We're all based on the international humanitarian law. It's the protection and prevention of harm to people. That's where we're looking forward. But we also respect, for example, the territory and the integrity of the nations where we are. We respect the IOs and NGOs, international organizations, non-governmental organizations, in the way they want to be treated and be treated by us. We respect the local customs. I think that's more, and we try to get in contact with the IOs and NGOs and the non-military actors we deal with as a NATO entity. I think that's what NATO's human security stands for.
Okay, Esther, do you have something to add from another perspective, maybe?
Well, I also lectured a lot on work together with the Iraqi armed forces on introducing the NATO doctrine on human security. And it was indeed a bit tough always to explain what is human security as such a broad agenda, indeed, like Paul explained, introduced by the United Nations. I always kind of explain it as what is the very basic of human survival. And what is, if we look, for example, it's a pyramid of Maslow, the right to exist, to live, basic, very basics. And what happens if that is missing? So people are going to organize it for themselves. In worst case situations, they are going to riot, or they are so frustrated with their governments that they are feeling the need to have an armed uprisal or of some sort. So for NATO, it was very important to look at those root causes of instability in their analysis of a conflict situation. So that's why I believe that NATO wanted to include human security as a very broad concept. And of course, we have to narrow it down a little bit to the protection of civilians focus, because it was way too broad, also including lots of actors that are not necessarily military focused. So yeah, that's how I used to explain the concept.
Yeah, I think you're right. You mentioned the protection of civilians. I think human security for NATO is actually the umbrella term.
Yes.
It's used to introduce the subject, to say, okay, people matters, and what we have to do, because we have the cross-cutting topics way back already. What we have to do, we have to look where can we be the most effective as NATO, looking at the cross-cutting topics, and from that perspective, we say, okay, there are 5 of them, and that's the protection of civilians, it's children and armed conflict, cultural property protection, combating trafficking in human beings, and
conflict-related sexual violence.
Yes, exactly. And those 5 are the most important for NATO, and that's the reason why we put them under the umbrella of human security.
We were talking, or you were mentioning the cross-cutting topics. I think not every one of our listeners knows what cross-cutting topics are or what it stands for. Could you quickly explain what it means in terms of, or well, in regards to NATO?
Yeah, a cross-cutting topic is a subject. NATO is aware of the importance of it. And it might change the result we want to gain if we don't pay attention to that. Actually, so it's not our primary responsibility to deal with the cross-cutting in the execution, but we have to keep that in mind. And looking at NATO itself, it's also cross-cutting because it's not only a CIMIC responsibility. A cross-cutting topic is also J1's responsibility, or the intelligence, or the operations, or logistics, or you name it. And therefore we say, okay, also within NATO, it's cross-cutting because it's not only the responsibility of the 9, it's cross-cutting through all the additional J's.
Yeah.
And at the end, it's to support the commander.
And just for our listeners, with 9, he meant CIMIC. So just to bring everyone on the same page. When we talk about, human security, especially when it comes to CIMIC or in a mission, you went to Iraq. Did you went there as in terms of CIMIC to foster human security, or what was your task there when it comes to this topic?
Yeah, let me maybe first explain it. I've been 5 years in Iraq, of which the first few years I was country director of a humanitarian organization. So that gave me the opportunity to also view from first hand the impact of military operations on the civilian population and civilian infrastructure, like the extreme demolition of the cities. I remember that I was, for example, in Mosul and Ramadi, and I saw all this destruction, and I thought, there has been no consideration about the protection of civilians in the planning of military operations. And then I came to NATO and I saw the completely other side. So I think we can talk a little bit about it further. But so when I came to NATO, as Paul explained, so NATO considers these cross-cutting teams as important in every single operation. So the NATO mission in Iraq was purely a capacity building operation. So it was not like a classic combat operation as we know. So we were there on the invitation of the Iraqi armed forces themselves, because they wanted to also build their capacity as being able to also defend themselves to potential new threats, such as we have seen in ISIS. And by supporting them into gaining a better capacity to defend themselves, we advise them, how, for example, to be better at intelligence or at planning or at operations and so on. So by bringing in those cross-cutting teams, that was kind of a must. But I was very lucky that I was the advisor on human security. And with the request from the Iraqi armed forces for that support, they also included help us to limit the impact of military operations on the civilian population and civilian infrastructure. So with that, it was a very clear recognition to say we have in our operations to defeat ISIS, we have made too many civilian casualties, and with that, of course, lost the trust of the population. So we want to prevent and we want to learn how we can do better in the future. So that was a very good opening, of course, for me to start the conversations about, okay, this is the NATO handbook that we have on human security. These are the subjects that we can introduce. Also because we want to learn as NATO from the past of the operations. That handbook was, of course, initiated because of the recognition that in Afghanistan and Iraq and all the other combat operations, there were also too many civilian casualties from our own operations. Yeah, so that is how I started to work with them. And I always say, like, there's not really like a handbook or a manual how to build capacity on protection of civilians, especially not in such context. Yeah. So that was kind of on to learn on the by doing it. And I was lucky to do at the same time my master and focusing on this subject. So that was kind of a multiplier of good effects. But it was very tough, extremely challenging at the same time. Yeah.
I think it's exactly where it's all about. It's if we go into a war, into our activities, we have to realize that civilians never asked for a war, and we should do everything to mitigate harm against the civilians. Yeah. And I think that's where NATO stands for. That we know that we have to fight, but and I think in current operations or future operations, we realize even more that it might be in an area where civilians and military are running together in the same area, and that we do everything to protect them as much as possible.
Yeah.
Sorry, do you want to add something first, Esther?
Yeah, I mean, as exactly what Paul says, and like there is so much that we can do in the preparation of our military interventions, in the training of our military staff, in the capabilities that we have in order to prevent civilian harm during the operation. So yeah, luckily we have a lot of tools.
Yeah, indeed. And Paul, I see you want to add something.
No, go ahead. No, actually what I wanted to say, and that's exactly what the CIMIC is being there, because if we talk about civilians, we talk about non-military actors. And by the way, not only the civilians who are non-military actors, it's also the IOs and the NGOs. And I think we as the CIMIC, we deal with them. We are the ones who are, from the military perspective, dealing and in contact with the civilians and the non-military, the additional non-military actors. And I think we have to understand what's going on. And if we know what's going on, we can protect them better, or at least we can adapt our plans. We can advise our commander, okay, keep that in mind. Your activity might harm civilians unnecessary, or we advise you to do so just to protect the people on the streets.
So I hear and I agree with you that CIMIC, or protection of civilians, human security, is an integral part to actually do good and protect the civilians, and that it's important for CIMIC to have this in mind, to adapt plans and to minimize the harm that is done by military action. But I wonder, if you don't have a capacity building mission, but you are going to deterrence and defense, what does this mean? It's like they will be all under pressure to decide something. They have to act fast. And I wonder how human security still has a place in all of this.
I think it's still there. It's not something that we decided. It's based upon the international humanitarian law. But it also has to do with the mission acceptance. It also has to do with our moral and the values NATO stands for. And we realize ourselves that I think very good. And from that perspective, I can promise that the CIMIC, who is on the table with the commander by developing the plans, and that starts from the early beginning when a mission starts up to the execution and even beyond, that CIMIC, he is actually the card to say, okay, we have to think twice if we execute this activity or if we execute that mission or that mission.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Do you have, Esther, if I may ask, do you have some experience in having those mission planning processes going on that the CIMIC part or the protection of civilian part, human security part, was overlooked or overheard because it was just no space to have this in mind as well?
Look, for NATO, it has been, of course, a while since we had such kind of operations. So in all honesty, no. I think like Afghanistan and Iraq and Libya were the last operations where they actually executed such. But of course, in any operation that they at the moment plan, whether it is in Lithuania or wherever NATO members are employed, as Paul said, they have to take into consideration the basic laws of armed conflict. And that's, of course, telling what to protect. Human security and the protection of civilians is explaining how to protect it. And yes, we need to do that and include that from a moral point of view. But of course, there are, as Paul said, many strategic arguments why it is of absolute necessity to include this in your operations. It's not a soft subject that comes at a last resort or something, or if you have time. No, I think we have all seen what has happened in the operations with the US in Iran. There was quite some support for the operations when they eliminated the regime. But as soon as they targeted the girls' school, all the legitimacy was lost. And this was, of course, we can talk about new technology or outdated intelligence or whatsoever. But you see like what has happened. What happens when you target, when you have just miss-target, not only the support of the local population for your objective of your mission, that could have been the result, but also the international support and legitimacy for your operation, as well as reciprocity, like that you definitely, like whatever you do to the other, it will come back to you as well. So there are so many arguments, very strong strategic arguments, why you shouldn't leave this as being a soft subject for the last, for an availability. No, it's an absolute must.
Yeah, no, definitely. What I wonder as well is if you use human security also for your strategic points, if you, as you said, with credibility, if you target something like a girls' school or something that you lose all the credibility. Can human security or the effect of human security, especially when it comes to CIMIC, winning hearts and minds, and we're the good people, we protect civilians, and so on, this concept, can this be weaponized as well to just gain your benefits out of it by saying, okay, we do that, we care for the population, we are there and do good? Can this turn around as well?
You said, okay, CIMIC is winning hearts and minds. I think that's a bit the old thinking. I think currently it's different. CIMIC is one of the core functions. So that's an indication how important it is during a mission. And I think the CIMICer, he is talking with the non-military combatants. The CIMICer is understanding the civil environment, or he tries to understand the civil environment. And that's where he is busy with. And therefore he is in contact with the other parties, the non-military actors in the area of responsibility, or the JO, how you want to call it. And that's what they're doing. And then they build the picture. They draw the picture of what's going on around us. And therefore, he's using those 5 or even 8 cross-cutting topics with everything a specific topic to understand what's going on in the area of operation from a non-military perspective. And that's what's called the wide picture, and that's the responsibility to draw that wide picture. And it's all to advise the commander, okay, this is what's going on, and keep that in mind when you take your decisions for your activities.
Just as a quick follow-up question, a wide picture is only drawn for the area, well, as you said, for your own area of operation or responsibility, but not on the enemy side, right?
No, that's the red picture then. Yeah.
Okay. Esther, because you were working as a humanitarian as well, do you have any insights from this perspective when it comes to, CIMIC caring for the civilians and using this to get their own needs met?
I saw, of course, the disaster if you don't. Like the Iraqi armed forces were not prepared to, for example, take care of or evacuate people from a besieged zone, and they didn't know how to prepare for refugee centers, and they didn't connect with the international organizations at first. So later, of course, they did with them, and they hoped to receive them. So in that perspective, I saw like the consequence of when you do not do it enough. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, no, I mean, definitely. It's not, not always like when you care for it and using it for your own needs or stuff.
Yeah.
But also not caring for it also has an impact, right? So that's, what you said answers totally the question, at least for me.
Yeah.
But then I wonder how many or why many humanitarians don't want to work together with the military, especially when it's so important that they also work together in terms of human security for the civilian population to be safe and secured.
I think that is probably a prejudice. It's not always the case. It very much depends from crisis to conflict situation. We all understand that, for example, in the situation in Gaza, you have to negotiate access with the Israelis to have humanitarian goods or the protection of your humanitarian workers. That's of course understandable. But that they want to be seen with Israelis or being protected by Israelis on their way to a refugee camp in Gaza, of course not. Like they will be seen as, hey, are you giving important information away? Or that is always. But of course, in another humanitarian disaster, you naturally work very closer to the population and to the organizations that are supporting them. In the cases where I have worked, it also depends. Like in the beginning, for example, the Iraqis were when the throwover of the Iraqi regime in 2002. There was, in the first place, quite an enthusiasm to work with the Americans, and that turned then against them. When they saw that they were not really going there to liberate them, but instead it turned out to a big civil war. So. I'm also looking at you, Paul, but it depends so much on the legitimacy of your objective of your operation, and if they want to work with you, and sometimes just purely negotiating access. That happens in Ukraine and Russia as well. Like you need to negotiate that access with the enemy, but do you want to be seen as actively working with them? No, of course not, and you prevent that by anyway. Yeah.
No, I think it's clear that we understand that at least we need some deconfliction. And I think it's not only NATO or the military forces who understand it. I think also the humanitarian actors in the field do understand it, and that you deconflict doesn't mean that you party or take party for NATO or whatsoever. So I think at least there should be any cooperation, or at least any dialogue. First for deconfliction, and better even for coordination, and then I think cooperation would be the best then. But I don't think we can reach that. But we have to talk to each other, and I think there's an understanding, because it's not only talking to NATO. I think it's also to the adversary, if there is any activity going on, that the humanitarian actors they talk to both parties, and I think we realize that, and I think everybody realizes that to let all parties do their job, you have to understand what the other party is doing. And I think that's why.
What is their mandate, and of course, like we understand their neutrality and impartiality as the very basis of their operations.
Yeah. I think it's also important to look at the point: what happens if we don't work together or know what the other side is doing, right?
Yeah, I think you cannot adapt your plans if you don't know what the other is doing. So maybe you have to adapt them if you know what's going on.
Yeah, definitely. I think all the concepts of coexistence, collaboration, cooperation, and all of those come into place when it comes to crises like in Gaza, in Iraq, in Ukraine. And I think it's important to understand, what does it mean? And with whom can I work together? And who is really like, okay, military, we can talk to each other, but that's it, right?
I think what's very important to also have as the basic, like the host nation is always first and foremost responsible for the protection of civilians. So they are also the ones that should then facilitate conversations with the international organizations and humanitarian organizations. As an occupying power, you are responsible for the protection of civilians and to facilitate that dialogue. And of course, again, depending on the legitimacy of your objective, we see it going completely wrong in Gaza. Yeah. So that's a complete, we see it happening. What is the consequence of not coordinating together? Yeah.
Yeah, I think we see it quite a lot. What happens when the occupying, force or party power is not taking care of the protection of civilians.
Yeah, because often that is not being considered in their planning, so they don't have the capacity. And then it goes very quickly wrong. Like if you cannot, for example, provide the safety and security for your population on the run, you see quickly like the narrative for like turning against you.
Yep, definitely. When we look at what's currently going on when it comes to the focus more on deterrence and defense, do you have the feeling that the topic of human security, even though it's still there, it's still widely known, it's talked about, that it's somehow still it got one of the back seats because it's not, it's like, okay, we have to focus on deterrence and defense. All the rest, well, it's there, we have it in mind, but do you think there's some adaptation needed when it comes to human security, especially in NATO territory?
I think human security is still in an defense and deterrence or in an Article 5 mission, because we have to protect people as much as possible, the civilians as much as possible. So I don't think it will change so much. It's always there. It still has to do with the mission acceptance. It still has to do with the international humanitarian law. It still has to do with as I said, so from that perspective, I think it doesn't change so much.
Esther.
But we are honest also, Paul, that we see, for example, in NATO a trend. The human security unit at NATO quite significantly has lost staff and also funding. This is of course, a negative trend that we see from supported by some of the member states. Which is concerning, absolutely concerning, and they will also, I think, they will see the consequence also of the loss of focus on this in the long term. But I think also that we discuss currently in the human security community probably also using a different terminology, because human security is being a very broad term, then the protection of civilians. Protection of civilians is both a responsibility for armed forces, but also a combination of humanitarian actors and of course the government and so on, security forces. Should we not use the terminology as, for example, civilian harm mitigation, very much looking at the technical aspects of the military operations in what we have discussed, like throughout in planning and intelligence and in targeting, what we can do from a military perspective. And I think that makes the subject then less soft and more strategic, with of course having always the moral dimension also at forefront. I know, Paul, that you have a little bit of a different...
I think you're absolutely right. I think it's more about the civil environment, and maybe you should call it civil environment security. And then you use the 8 cross-cutting topics as a kind of guidance or a topic where you look at and say, okay, if we adhere to that, what's actually in that topic? Is it protection of civilians or children are in conflict, or cultural property protection? But it's way more. It's also about the baseline requirements, the continuity of communications, the continuity of transportation, of healthcare, and we have to keep that in mind as well. And that's if we understand what's going on and we keep that in mind, then we have that civil environment security, and then we can act on and try to do our best to fight and to respect the people as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. So for you, it would make sense to combine the human security pillar somehow with the resilience pillar, because it fosters each other?
Yeah, maybe we should not name it the human security because I think that was another thing. I think human security in NATO is different from human security in the UN. Just to avoid misunderstanding, maybe we should drift away from that term and from that perspective, as Esther, you mentioned already. And if I said, okay, maybe we should give it a different name. And say, okay, it's all about the civil environment, but we have to take in consideration in our plans, in our activity, and then call it the civil environment security, because finally it's about the people who never asked for a war or whatsoever, to protect them as much as possible. And from that perspective, to build that understanding of the civil environment using those 8 cross-cutting topics and the 7 baseline requirements. Okay, if we draw the picture then with those topics, then it's clear what's going on. And then again, it's to advise that commander in his decision-making process.
Yeah, I fully support it. At the same time, I would like to go a little bit further. Like I would really like to focus, and I think that what we also will see in with the very rapid advancement of new technology, in targeting, in new kind of weapons, the targeting decisions not being made anymore by humans, but like purely based on artificial intelligence, and very quick also without any human intervention. And I think that will also probably give us a different perspective on the whole human security, protection of civilians, civilian harm mitigation agenda, and what also the technical capabilities, what should we know. But what I also would really like to focus on is purely the military ethics. So what does it mean that not anymore a human pull a trigger or press a button or flies in an airplane, but that's a drone that's 1,000 kilometers further, has such an impact while we don't see or feel or are not aware of the impact that we have.
I actually had a talk with someone the past few days about exactly this. Who is then responsible for it, Who's behind the drone? I mean, someone starts the drone, but then what happens is out of everyone's hands.
Yeah.
So it's still the responsibility.
The computer makes the decision to target that girls' school, and there was no one actually actively deciding on that specific target location. Mm-hmm. So these are whole new discussions that we need to embed. And what I really like to do is throughout the military education and in every single branch of the military, that there is an angle on human security, protection of civilians. So it's not, it is, of course, understanding the human environment from all those perspectives. And that gives us a very well-informed or the best possible informed decision that we can make. But also on a technical aspect of warfare, we have to include it.
Yeah, definitely. Now, listening to you, I wonder if all the new topics, when we also talk about MDO, like space, cyber, if those topics are also already included in the human security sector, or if human security is also already broadened up for cyber, AI, but also, I don't know, space in a way, or if this is still something that has to be integrated, or human security has to be integrated into those areas.
Well, I think if you talk about multi-domain operations, you also talk about the capabilities in the civilian world. And as I mentioned, part of the baseline requirements, or it is part of the baseline requirements, and we look at it, and maybe it's not so much human security as such, but it's again to understand what's going on over there, and to realize how the situation is. So I think even those new areas, space and cyber, which might have an impact on the civilian side, that's also taken in consideration. Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And listening to you as well, Esther, are those discussions already going on that you mentioned, integrating AI and military ethics, and who is responsible for when there is a drone attack or something? Is this already something that is going on, or is it just a wish that you have that these discussions start?
No, I think there's an active discussion ongoing, but it depends very much in which branch. So I just this morning attended, for example, a conference by ICRC, and they are actively reviewing the international humanitarian law, and if it not should be updated, indeed, with having in mind those new kind of weapons. So yeah, that's the discussion. But
well, I think artificial intelligence as such is so well. Yeah, it's so quick developing. And that might have so much impact on the battlefield in the future. And as you always see, the technology is always ahead of the countermeasures against it and the legal countermeasures. So the United Nations point of view on that. Yeah. And that's what we have to realize, that there should be any development against the use of automated weapons and so on.
Yeah, and of course also systems such as Gloria and Lavender, like that are deciding or that are analyzing what are the targets. I think that we are reviewing such systems, but the developments go so fast in this. With especially also non-public actors, so the industry.
Like the private sector in general.
Private sector in general, yeah. And that are working, of course, with the weapon industry that is advancing so quickly. So yeah, we should also be very much aware and informed, and we should also have the specialists in-house that can follow this. So don't be blind for this.
Thinking about it, I think the development is going so fast, and if we took look at where civilians rely on the internet, for example, because all systems are running on the internet. So for 20 years ago, we never thought about it, and now we think about it, that we have to protect that kind of requirements or that kind of systems as well. In our war fighting, we never thought about it, but I think more and more we have to follow that development.
Well, I was thinking also over the last few weeks, and of course during the Gaza war, that we see like such a very precise interventions, like in a storied building, in one floor, in one room, like to eliminate a specific target. And at the same time that we do see also that like larger weapons are used in heavily populated areas where so many civilian casualties are there as a result. So on one time, you think like, hey, those new developments can prevent a lot of civilian harm, collateral damage in military operations. Of course, those weapons are still very, very expensive. And at the same time, we think like, how is it possible that still like so many casualties are emerging because of our interventions, or not ours, but others, yeah.
But don't you think then that attacking civilians is just a method of war?
Oh, absolutely.
And just on purpose attack so many civilians then?
Of course, and then you come to the impunity of those deeds, like that we indeed what we see at the moment happening in Sudan, that we hardly understand and see what's actually happening, and let alone that we can bring them to justice, and that the international justice system is upheld. So that's one of the major concerns, I would say.
No, I don't think you have to look that far. I think if you look at the war in Ukraine, how often is recently that monastery was attacked, and we all know
UNESCO,
that's against all laws, and it is used. Well, I think that's an attack on the civilization or the civils over there. So that's new development, or at least it's a development, and we should take that in consideration, and hopefully we'll never go on that way.
Yeah, let's hope so. But speaking about hopes, I actually, now that I was listening to you and I heard so much about new technology and new developments and kind of the future, I wonder what your hopes or wishes are that will happen in the next few weeks, months, years in regards to human security, to bring it forward, to improve it, to bring it more on people's minds, whatever you can think of.
Yeah, I would say I wish that there would be peace and I think that's where we all want to go. Well, I think every healthy mind should think about that. We should avoid all that kind of activities that civilians are harmed, and in every conflict civilians are harmed. So that would be the best. Maybe it's a bit too naive to think that will be the near future. And then I think the other thing what I can hope for is that we are strong enough in our defense, or at least in our deterrence, that all potential adversaries think twice before attacking the alliance, because, and I always give the example, it's like a bouncer in a bar. If you know that if there is a big bouncer in front of the door and you want to go in and say, oh, that's nice, let's have a fight tonight, and you realize that there is the guy with the big arms and he will kick you out, then you think twice to start that fight. And I think that we as the alliance are strong enough to have that deterrence. Okay, every potential adversary refuses to start a fight because his ass will be kicked.
Yeah, so 2 weeks ago I was lecturing in Sanremo and I had a class with participants from Saudi Arabia, from Syria, from Malaysia, from Sudan, from like all over the world, literally like the places where you want to have impact and share like what you can do to prevent civilian harm. And with all the arguments that we actually have, like the handbooks that are created are, I always say that is our ammunition. Huh? Like these are the arguments why we say this is how much it is important and strategic importance besides the moral arguments to protect civilians. And at the end of the week, there was so much enthusiasm for it. And I so much hope that by sharing our stories that we can definitely have an impact. And I have been always asked, so what was the result of your support to the Iraqi armed forces? And I always said, like, I didn't see anything very concrete until I heard from one of my colleagues that they were planning an exercise. And one of the Iraqi generals said, but how about the protection of civilians? Because I learned it from Esther. And so there was kind of a seed being planted, that it's something in their mind to take that into consideration when they plan and execute the operation. So I sincerely hope that that's, of course, that how we can conduct our warfare in the future. Unfortunately, the armed forces are necessary. We have to have indeed our deterrence on order. We have to invest a lot into our armed forces, but don't lose this perspective. It's of essential importance. I always say, without protection of civilians, you won't win the war. Like you see it in all the conflicts that we have seen over the last decades, where protection of civilians is not at the forefront of the commander's intents, forget it. Yeah.
Well, that's, listening to you two, there's hope,
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
And listening also to your comment is that there always will be armed forces. It's not only for war or crisis, right? It's also for disaster management. If there are natural disasters, they are a good support as well. So, yes, they will always be there. We will always need them. Hopefully not in war or crisis, but only for support when there are other not man-made disasters are going on. Which I hope will also be not that much, but... with climate change, you never know, right?
Like if there is a responsibility to protect, as such as in situations as Sudan at the moment, that we are, with our alliance, not able, because of our capacity considerations, to do an intervention and to support, for example, UN peace enforcement of peacekeeping troops. That's sad. Like you would like to change that. And so that is also my... that is my hope. It is not only like, of course, the first mandate is to defend our own territory, but the fact that we are not able to uphold the international rules-based orders in the world because of an absolute capacity issue, like that's very sad to see.
Yeah. Indeed. Yeah. Unfortunately, also a sad thing, we're coming to an end of the podcast. So for this, I have 2 final questions. The first one would be the 3 or 4 or 5 or how many key takeaways you want to draw from this podcast for our listeners.
Yeah, I think what we discussed in the podcast is that that human security is a very large, broad concept, and then we narrowed it down a little bit to protection of civilians, and then probably to civilian harm mitigation, or what was the one how you wanted to call it, Paul?
The civil environment security.
Civil and environment security. Yeah, I think that's a very interesting and necessary discussion that we should continue to have within NATO, but of course also within the broader alliance of partners. And I think that we definitely should include this discussion in all the branches of armed forces, but especially look to the fast and furious new developments to see also what is our role in this. And for me, the arguments, especially the moral and strategic arguments, why it is of absolute importance to include those considerations in your planning and conduct of operations. That's for me the main message.
Thank you.
Yeah, from my perspective, I think we should realize that CIMIC is a very important player when it comes to a mission. I think the CIMICer, he is talking with the outside world, with the non-military actors. And I think by knowing what's going on around there and take that in your decision-making process, you're able to provide that security to humans. I think from that perspective, it's important that we have our CIMICers, that we continue to work with them, that we realize how important they are, and to build that picture, to inform the commander, and to protect civilians as much as possible.
Okay, and then the final question. Our podcast is called Beyond the Battlefield. And I always ask, what does it mean for you? So what does it mean for you to go beyond the battlefield?
Look, I'm a reservist, but I'm also a civilian. So I feel per definition beyond the battlefield. I remember that the Iraqis, once I introduced myself, often they ask, have you been in a battle situation? Because that was my legitimacy then, probably, you know? So I'm always, per definition, outside the battlefield. I don't hold the weapons. I don't... And of course, I think what we do is we see the civil society. We do see the people, we face them, we see their suffering from regimes, or we see them suffering from a situation in which they need to be supported, as otherwise we want to be there. So the fact that we can share their messages through our militaries, that's something so beautiful. The fact that I could share what Iraqis really do believe, and that they are not terrorists, but that they honestly were looking for a safe and secure future, and that they would love to be part of that. Yeah, that was something very beautiful to do.
Yeah, it's also a good answer to what's beyond or going beyond the battlefield.
Yeah, it's much beyond the T-walls, beyond that armed vehicle. There's so much more in the society what you want to see and what you understand.
I mean, I'm also civilian, so I understand you completely there by saying that.
Yeah, I would say beyond the battlefield is if there is not a battlefield, then there is a peaceful world.
Yes,
and I think that's where we should aim for. And I think by deterrence, we can, hopefully keep that peaceful world longer and longer.
Okay, thank you so much for your answers. If you have any final points or comments you want to share with the audience, now's your moment. Otherwise,
it was such a pleasure to be together, Paul. We know each other a long time already, but it was very, very good to kind of discuss our.
Yeah, it's excellent to have somebody with so much experience and so clear vision on protection of civilians and human security here, and being able to share that with us. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. Yeah.
Well, it was my pleasure.
Very passionate
having you. Well, that's good. We need those people. So that's good having you two here and hearing your passion and your thoughts and ideas behind the concept of human security. It was really a pleasure having you here, and I learned so much, and it was such a, I have so many thoughts now in my mind that I have to write down and think further, and so I really appreciate the time you took to sit down with me and share all your experiences and ideas. And with that, I want to thank also the audience for turning in again, and if you have any questions, you can always send an email, or if you have any wishes for a further episode. They probably have a lot more to share, so turn in for the next time when we talk about multi-domain operations. And thank you again, and
welcome,
see you next
Sonia.
time.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Beyond the Battlefield, produced by the Civil-Military Cooperation Center of Excellence and hosted by me, Sonia. The views shared here reflect personal expertise and experience and do not necessarily represent official positions. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.